Donald Trump's turn to now at what has become known as the holy meeting grail of the conservative movement. They call it CPAC, and this morning, the president is paying a call on them, and today, we are there when he does. And when does being bipartisan get you in trouble? When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez catches you voting with Republicans and vows to primary you if you do. Let's just say she's got a list. And we've got the House Deputy Chief Whip, Dan Kildee, on what he thinks about that list and her. And who says Amazon is gone? New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has a message for Jeff Bezos. Please come back. Pretty please? Why Republican New York City Council Minority Whip Joe Borelli fears it may be too little too late. And he's not blaming the governor. Guess who he is? And apparently Kim Jong-un thinks the third time will be the charm. Yeah, he wants another summit with President Trump. I want you to meet the former Assistant Secretary of State, who says not unless Kim does some big things now, before any big meeting ever, then Michael Cohen, Democratic rock star. Never mind, Donald Trump's former personal lawyer is going to prison for lying to Congress. Now he's all the rage in Congress. More hearings, more investigations, lots more questions. Republicans call it squeezing the lemon before this particular legal lemon is off to jail. But who is really getting squeezed? We report you just might want to hide. All that and Bernie Sanders in New York to compare childhoods with the President of the United States. And Money Maestro Dan Geltrude on the good financial karma around this President of the United States. Sure, the Dow's 9-week streak of gains has stopped. When it comes to making money, that doesn't mean you have to. It is simpler than you think, as long as you think simply. He'll explain, because the Karma King of Cash is here on the show that's all about good karma, even when all the news isn't good. That's why we're here. That's why we're live. And that's why we are starting right now. All right, it has been a who's who of big conservative leaders addressing CPAC, but the biggest of all after a whirlwind week overseas and here at home is the President of the United States. And at CPAC, they are getting ready to hear him and roar with him. Fox News correspondent Ellison Barber at the White House with the latest. Hey, Ellison.
Hey, Neil. Yeah, so Vice President Mike Pence addressed the conservative conference yesterday. President Trump will do the same a little later today. He's going to travel about 20 minutes away from here. This takes place at the National Harbor in Maryland. It's likely President Trump's last trip outside of D.C. this week, a week that he began by flying roughly 20 hours and landing in Hanoi, Vietnam on Tuesday. Talks with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un ended early without any sort of major agreement. President Trump says they are still working towards something, but that signing something in Hanoi just wasn't the right move.
This just wouldn't have been good for our country, and frankly, he can look at it the same way. Maybe he can look at it the same way, but we get along really well. He's a different kind of a guy, and I just said, look, this isn't going to be working. So I have a feeling something down the line will happen, and it'll happen. It'll be good. They wanted to denuke certain areas, and I wanted everything. And the sanctions are there, and I didn't want to give up the sanctions unless we had a real program. And they're not ready for that.
North Korea denied asking for sanctions to be lifted in their entirety and said the country's foreign minister said that they asked for partial sanctions relief. A senior State Department official told reporters North Korea asked the U.S. to lift sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council back in March of 2016 and that the North Koreans wanted all of them lifted except for the ones having to do with armaments. The senior State Department official said that it would have been billions of dollars in sanction relief that would in effect put the U.S. in a position of subsidizing the ongoing development of North Korea's weapons of mass destruction. Still, the president is optimistic. He has officials on both sides of the aisle back on Capitol Hill saying that they think he made the right decision in walking away. Again, President Trump says that he still thinks he has a good relationship with Kim Jong-un and that they can get something done. We'll see if he has anything else to say about those talks, future talks, whatever, at CPAC a little later today. Neil?
All right, look forward to that. Ellison, thank you very much. Ellison Barber at the White House. Meanwhile, to the Democratic side, new reports of infighting among some Democrats as freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reportedly threatens to keep a list of her colleagues who dare vote across party lines. Fox News correspondent Jillian Turner has more from Washington. Jillian.
Good morning, Neil. So House Democrats faced a major test of their resolve a bit earlier this week when Republicans insisted a bill focused on gun background checks needed to include language on undocumented immigrants. Ultimately, House Republicans convinced 26 Democrats to cross party lines and join them by voting yes to amend this bill. This despite a clear warning from the Speaker of the House. Take a listen.
Vote no. Just vote no, because the fact is a vote yes is to give leverage to the other side, to surrender the leverage on the floor of the House.
Now Democrats are trying to circle the wagons, strategizing about new ways to prevent anything similar from ever happening again. The key, limiting the ability of Republicans to use a legislative tool known as an MTR, or a motion to recommit. The Republican minority's been relying on the MTR to force the Democrats' hand on major contentious issues like this week's gun bill. But preempting the Dems' intentions to mess with the MTR, the House Republican leader issued a stark warning.
Changes to the MTR would be a nuclear option, and it would leave a stain on this majority just 2 months in.
A spokesman for congressional Republicans took the opportunity to taunt House Democrats, saying, "Buckle up and grab your popcorn because Democratic infighting is already reaching a breaking point, and it's only month 2 of Democrats' House majority. Just wait until the intra-party primaries begin." Until that next round of primaries begins, though, House Democrats are proceeding apace with pushing through some major items on their agenda, like the resolution to strike down what they call President Trump's fake national emergency and legislation to protect public lands. Neil?
Jillian Turner, thank you very, very much. So House Democrats, what is going on here? And is there division among the ranks? Who better to ask than the House Democrats' Chief Deputy Whip, Dan Kildee. Congressman, very good to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Neil.
What do you think of what Congresswoman Cortez is reportedly doing, sir? That is, keeping a list of colleagues of yours who vote with Republicans, I guess on anything.
Well, first of all, she doesn't need to keep the list. It's all a matter of public record. Anybody who wants to look at a vote record can just look at it. So I think that part of it's a bit overstated. I don't think it's productive, however, for Democrats in one district to interfere with the politics or the voting decisions or the choices that are made by Democrats coming from other districts. We have a diverse party. We've got lots of different points of view. I do think we've kind of got wrapped around our axle on this issue of the MTR, the motion to recommit. It's a procedural tool that both parties have used, and I think it's a bit overstated in terms of how this is playing out. But no, I don't think it's productive for us to interfere in one another's politics. We each come from separate districts. We have our own constituents. We are responsible to those constituents, and we ought to leave it at that.
Congressman, all of this occurs at a time when many equate the face of the Democratic Party today, fairly or not, with the Congresswoman from New York. Do you think that's a mistake?
I do. I don't think any one member of our caucus is the face of the party. I'm the face of the party for the people of the 5th District of Michigan. We all have interest in what other members say, but you know, we have diverse views, but especially with these new members, I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding of the makeup of the new Democratic majority. There are some really progressive voices, and certainly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is one of those, but there are also lots of really new, interesting new members who come with a national security background, for example. Lots of military veterans comprise our new majority. So no one person can say they are the face of our party. We have a diverse party, lots of points of view, and I think that's fine.
You've been known as a fellow who tries to work with the other side, even the disparate sides within your own party, but that almost seems to be a cliche today. I don't mean to minimize or criticize you, sir, but I'm reminded of the grief that Joe Biden got for simply saying that the Vice President of the United States is a decent guy, and he had to dial that back. Do you worry about the tone getting worse, even within your own party?
I worry about it no matter where it comes from. If it comes from folks within my party, I'm certainly willing to talk to them and call them on it. And when it comes from the president or somebody else, I think we have to do the same. I think, Neil, one of the things that gets confused is that we can have really fundamental differences, policy differences, and we can have really spirited arguments. But I think where our country is getting off the rails is that the tone and the language that is used to describe one another is gone way beyond where it should. And, you know, in the case of the vice president, or even in my own case, I'll give you an example. I have a really good personal relationship with Mark Meadows. Mark and I came to Congress together. He's a real conservative guy. He's a strong ally and friend of the president's. He and I disagree on almost everything, but we're friends, and we can talk to one another. And I think that says something. The tone that we set has as much to do with our ability to work together when we do agree than it does to argue with one another when we disagree. And I think what we lose is the ability to work together when maybe there's a policy eclipse and we just happen to be on the same side of an issue. If we throw one another under the bus every 5 minutes, the ability to come together around something like infrastructure is going to be lost. And the American people are the losers in that case. So, I do think we all need to dial it back on our side, on their side. I think the president, unfortunately, sets a large a part of the tone here. And I think we have to hold him responsible for that. But nobody gets a pass because we start matching the tone of Donald Trump. I think that's a mistake.
Now, I talked to a Democratic colleague of yours off air, sir, who was saying about Congresswoman Cortez that she should be primaried herself, that she's wrecking the party, destroying its chances. What did you think of that?
See, I think it works both ways. I don't think we should be interfering with one another's politics. The people who elected us get to make those choices. And when Democrats, or for that matter, Republicans, start reaching into other states, into one another's districts, and try to dictate to the voters of a district that they don't represent who should represent them, I think that's an overreach. I'm going to let the people of the district that she represents make that choice. If somebody wants to run against her, that's the system. But I don't think it's a good practice for us to get involved in those races at all.
Congressman Dan Kildee, very good seeing you again. Thank you for getting up on a Saturday to join us. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Neil.
Dan Kildee. All right, now we've seen a lot of conservative speakers at CPAC, but the one that they're waiting for, the biggest one of all, of course, the President of the United States. What's at stake when he starts speaking after this? Later on in Brooklyn, New York, for a crowd that's already assembled, and quite a few there in Brooklyn, to see Bernie Sanders. He's going to talk about his childhood, growing up in Brooklyn, later on moving to Vermont, becoming the mayor of Burlington, to sort of lay out his philosophy that's been remarkably consistent over the years. He was cool on these issues. He was going to remind people before some of the latest on the left were even born. So that will be something to watch. It's almost exactly time with the president's remarks to CPAC, so it's a tough battle for Antoine, who's going to be joining us shortly, as to which event he watches. We've got the Republican commentator, Joe Borelli, joining us, the aforementioned Democratic strategist, Antoine C. Rye, and Mosnansky and Partners, President Lee Carter, a very good read of polls and public opinion, particularly on the Republican side. Lee, I end it with you. Obviously, part of the approach that Bernie Sanders is taking today is, I am a man of the people.
That's right.
These are my roots. I'm consistent. I'm not all over the map. I am who I am.
There's something that people really love about your origin story, about figuring out who it is that you are, why you believe what you believe, and it makes it all authentic and real. So the fact that he can go back to his roots and talk about how he's been believing this all of this time and has lived this life to get to here is something that's going to make people trust him more. And when you have that kind of a story, I think it's smart that you really lean into it, and he does. So he's incredibly authentic, and people really do resonate with that. Now, whether or not people like his policies, that's a different story, but there's a lot of popularity out there for this guy.
You know, and I know polls are all over the map. It's very, very early. He leads in New Hampshire. That's not surprising. He's from neighboring Vermont. So he leads, I think, 4 or 5 points in one of the latest reads over Joe Biden. What do you think of this battle erupting here?
Well, first of all, I take every poll that's going on right now, and I laugh at it because I'm old enough to remember when I was a youngster working for Hillary Clinton in South Carolina in 2007, and Barack Obama was down 20 points, and he went on to win the state very hard. So, but most of these polls at this point, Neil, are all name ID. And you can't deny the fact that Bernie has some name ID and name recognition. Some of it's geographical. But I'll tell you what I've told everybody. I still think he has a math problem. I still think the heart and soul of the Democratic primary vote is African American. I still think he has some real problems there. And keep in mind, not all the players who are going to be in this race are in yet. And this is a totally different race than it was in 2016. And Bernie's never had to face 2 African-American candidates, a well-qualified and well-oiled machine in Kamala Harris, a Latino candidate, and the dynamics of our party have changed quite a bit. And so while he's enjoying some popularity now, It's all about sustainability.
No one raises money like he does, right? $6 million within 24 hours.
It's not how you start in this business; it's how you finish.
No, I understand
Direction
that, but
is far more important than speed.
That blows anyone else away. In terms of, if that's your barometer, you use
so
at least
far,
early on.
So far, Biden is not in the race yet.
Right.
So just hold your powder.
If Biden enters the race, he's the automatic front runner in your eyes?
I think the polls indicate that now. I think the challenge for Uncle Joe is to maintain that popularity and run a race that he's never had to run before. This will also be the first time he's run as the former vice president.
Yeah, you're right about that. You know, Joe, the one thing we were mentioning, Joe Biden, maybe it says something about the Democratic Party today, maybe our times today, that just saying that the Vice President of the United States is a decent guy gets you in a beehive of trouble. Is he an oddity in this year's campaign if he enters? Because there's stuff like that.
Well, I think the Democratic Party might try to frame him as a relic of a bygone era, and to some degree he is. We are far removed from where we were as a country politically than we were, say, in the 2000s and 2010s. I think Biden is going to come in at some point soon, be the elephant in the room, just as Bernie Sanders is now. But as you said before, and as Antoine said earlier, you look back historically, and the people that were at the top of the polls at this point have historically not gone on to do well when it comes to winning the White House.
Right, and
you look at Obama and Clinton and even Jimmy Carter.
Absolutely. You know, Lee, what is interesting to me, and we sometimes overstress this infighting, but it's fairly palpable to me because one of the fortunate things with my job is I get to talk to everybody, you guys, and I get a different read from different folks. But within the Democratic Party, there is this really frenetic, obsessive push to the hard left, led, let's say, by the Congresswoman Cortez's. And then you have a House leader like Dan Kildee here just a couple of minutes ago saying that approach to look after punishing or keeping a list of Democrats who vote with Republicans, that's not good. Not good for the party, not good for governing. So there is this sort of, battle for the party soul going on.
There is, but it's much like what the Republicans went through in 2015.
Absolutely.
What kind of party are we going to be?
2010.
And when you've got this many different candidates that are running, that's exactly what it is. It is a battle for who they are and who they want to be. And is it going to be the party of the far left? I'm not sure that it is. Is it going to be the party of the past? We're going to see if Joe Biden's going to resonate right now. And I think there is a lot of.
But do you think she's getting, that is, Cortez is getting a little ahead of her skis, making threats like that?
I don't think she is, not because I like what she's doing necessarily, but this is who she is, and this is why she's getting so much attention. And because she is, look, she is setting the agenda that we're all talking about almost on a daily basis.
You're absolutely right. But Antoine, let me ask you about that, because thehill.com is out right now with a survey, I guess, of CPAC attendees. I'm sorry I took you away from that event. Anyway, they say that Joe Biden, in their mind, poses, to your point, the greatest threat to the president. He's the one, I guess, they fear the most. What do you think?
Well, I think that Joe Biden, better known as America's uncle, Uncle Joe, most people view him as the person who can bring the many corners of the Democratic Party together. And depending on if he's the nominee, depending on who he puts on the ticket with him, could really be a game changer, not just for the White House, but also for other races that will be on the ballot. But Mia, make no mistake, we're talking about a battle for the party soul. We're going through growing pains right now, so we're being stretched. However, I do think the party has to understand, particularly our new members, we have to win races outside of New York, California,
You
Massachusetts.
might just be grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory, though.
This is a marathon, not a sprint.
I see what you did.
I am confident. I am confident that we will come together in the end, but I think we have to tread careful.
All right. We're going to be back with Joe Borelli a little later in the show talking about Amazon and the governor's quest to make sure they don't wander. But they are wandering. We'll have a lot more after this. You're watching. North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un says he is open to another summit with President Trump. The Pentagon has already said it is suspending 2 large-scale joint military exercises with South Korea. This, of course, after the president walked away from the table, the North Koreans say they walked away from the table. Walking away from a table is not necessarily a sign of awful things to come. Remember, Ronald Reagan did that in Iceland with Mikhail Gorbachev, and in a different time, in a different era, John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev did not get off to a great start when they first met. Different times, different presidents, different approaches, but a rough start doesn't mean, and in the end, a failed approach. Let's go to the former Assistant Secretary of State under President George H.W. Bush, Robert Charles. Secretary, good to have you.
Thank you.
Many have read into that failure to secure a deal, that it was a waste of time. What do you think?
Well, analogies can be overdrawn, but this one I think may be closer than people realize. In 1986, Ronald Reagan did walk out on Gorbachev. And what came out of that was a series of breakthroughs, not war, because for the first time, Gorbachev really realized that Reagan meant what he said. He was not going to give up the Strategic Defense Initiative. And what came out of that, interestingly, is that once the two men had baselined each other's points of view, and they had gotten into a summit, they had had a summit 1 year earlier that was not very successful. They were at an impasse. All of a sudden at Reykjavik, things were very hopeful, and then they crashed. And what happened after that is that within a year you had the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, which eliminated more than 2,600 nuclear weapons. And actually before, just after Reagan left office, he had started the negotiations on the START agreement. It got inked in 1991. And that agreement got rid of 80% of all nuclear weapons in the world. So remarkably, sometimes a walkout gives you a baseline to think things through again. And I'll be honest, I'm a little bit more optimistic than the average person, because as I look at Kim Jong-un, I see two things possibly happening in his future. The first is if there's another summit and he can bring himself to understand the economic advantages that come from an agreement to get rid of all the nuclear weapons and the vulnerability that attaches to having those nuclear weapons, that could be treaty number one. And treaty number two could be a miniature of the Reagan-Gorbachev agreements, which is to say if you got rid of your strategic and intermediate range missiles, we could essentially give him an Iron Dome and protect him forever against everybody, including China, when he starts to move forward. So it's the future is very foggy, and nuclear negotiations take a long, long time. But there's more hope there, I think, than there is reason to be disappointed.
If you were the president, Robert, would you hold off on any meetings until you had a sense going there that you would be signing off on something?
Well, the normal course of events is that you have a framework agreement, and the framework agreement is agreed by staff ahead of time, and then you show up and sort of do the diplomatic piece. This president is very hands-on. He's very engaged personally. And you can say, gosh, that hangs everything out there right out in the open. But at the same time, I think I would say get your staffs working together on something that pushes in the direction that I just mentioned, some kind of breakthrough that allows Kim to understand he could be a transformational leader like a Gorbachev. He could have a more open economy. Their economy is, although it's hurting under the sanctions, and we should ramp those up and keep China's feet to the fire. At the same time, believe it or not, there is a subterranean economy over there that suggests that maybe he really understands the future is with supply and demand and not with command and control.
Do you ever get a sense, though, Robert, that the North Korean leader is kind of in over his head, that he's overwhelmed, and that either he ignores the people around him who hope to countenance deals that will be of some substance, or they're running the show? But whatever the case, he doesn't impress. And that contrary to the kind of things the president has said about him, maybe the president's not really impressed.
So that's probably true. He's young, but there are advantages in being young. When he looks at the future, his future is a lot longer than his father's or grandfather's at the time they took control. So in reality here, I think he has the potential ultimately to make himself into a transformational leader. You're right. I mean, Neil, he's not Gorbachev. Gorbachev was a seasoned former member of the Politburo.
Right.
He was old by the time he started negotiating with Reagan, who was older. But at the end of the day, hope comes from believing there is a possible future that is in accord with the other side. And I do believe here that his other futures are dim. And if he looks at this one closely, he can see himself as an economically transformational leader. And, people say, one last point, people say, well, this was a human rights abuser. He's killed people right and left. How could we ever negotiate with him? Remember that when Gorbachev came to the table the first time, he was running the gulags, and he was as egregious a human rights leader. And what happened? At the summit in Reykjavik, he started out, and from that point forward, put human rights on the table and said, I understand this is something we've got to do better at.
Well put, Robert. Thank you for the history reminders as well. Robert Charles, before I move out here, I just want to let you know that we're getting word out of Nigeria of a pipeline explosion. 50 people are missing after pipeline explosion. This is one co-run right now by Shell Petroleum Development Company. Again, we don't know the source of the shutdown, whether it was sabotage. We do know Nigeria is an OPEC member, and that oil, that, would be presumably missing on the markets would be an issue for them to deal with next week. In the meantime, if you thought that Michael Cohen hearing was captivating, just wait. There are plenty more, a lot more after this.
Whether Donald Trump is functionally a president or an organized crime boss.
This president has lied. Collusion or obstruction of justice. We're talking about finances. We're talking about the foundation. This really needs to be investigated and explored.
I think that President Trump, frankly, headed up what can only be described as a criminal enterprise.
All right, never mind until waiting for all the facts. Where are we going with this? Obviously, they're talking about getting ready for still more probes and trying to squeeze more out of Michael Cohen before he hops off to jail for 3 years. Republican Congressman Mark Green is part of that House Oversight Committee that had a chance to talk to Cohen. Congressman, what do you think of that? The president's guilty of every sin in the book as a result.
Now, this is ridiculous. So the best witness they've got, Neil, and by the way, thanks for having me on the show.
Good to have you.
The best witness they've got is Michael Cohen, a guy who lied multiple times to the IRS, lied on financial documents, lied to Congress, and he's the witness to Congress. It's pretty ridiculous. It just shows who they are. It shows, you know, the president is across the world in Vietnam strategically trying to bring about peace in the world, and all they care about is taking out the president. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But, you know, Congress, I didn't hear a lot of your colleagues on the right defend the president. Obviously, you're going after the guy who was passing all of this information along, and he's a convicted liar. He's going up to jail because he lied to Congress. But some of his statements, everything from, you know, he's a crook, can't be trusted, he's anti-gay, he's a racist. The substance of the remarks were never challenged by Republicans. I wonder why that is.
Oh, I think a lot of us went after the things that he said. I mean, you know, from the comments about his job and not wanting a job with the White House. I mean, we took him on that. We took him on his foreign contracts issues. I mean, we really went after his credibility.
No, you did, and I don't mean to blur those lines, sir. I guess what I caught is when someone says something over the top about someone, let's just say who I like or care for, someone, whether a friend or a relative, and I don't defend that friend or relative on some outlandish comments, the racist thing, the he's a crooked businessman thing, and all this other stuff. I just wondered why that is.
Well, from the racist standpoint, you know, we talk about that. That conversation did come up. Even Congressman Tlaib accused Mark Meadows of being a racist, and there was a lot of pushback on that.
Right, I remember.
But it's very interesting. You know, AOC and the Democrats are out there being critical of the president as a racist, being critical of us. You know, we are anti-diversity, and yet if you don't think exactly like she does, she's going to put you on a list. I mean, that hypocrisy is mind-boggling, and yeah, we're taking that on.
So if they're going to take it, the Democrats with still more Cohen hearings, and with or without Cohen, once he's in jail, hearings based on what he said, either at a public forum or one behind closed doors, what are we looking at here? Where is this all going?
Oh, it's absolutely going towards impeachment. I mean, these guys they hate Donald Trump, and they're going to do everything they can to try to take him out.
Do they tell you that? Do some of your Democratic colleagues whisper and say, this is where we're going with this?
No one's come up to me, Neil, and said, hey, this is our grand strategy, but it's pretty obvious from what they're doing, I think.
All right, so what do you think the president should do in response? Now, he tweets the credibility issue of Michael Cohen, and that's fair game because Michael Cohen has been seen and reported on tape saying great things about the president. What a savvy businessman he is, how open he is to all races and people, and then just the opposite this hearing. So I get that and see that. But they're going to use him nevertheless to say that he opened up a can of worms here. Do you think he opened up a can of worms?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, their goal is to just, you know, it's like Bush lied, people died, and they're going to just say it over and over again and hope that it sinks in. They're going to continue to say that Donald Trump is a racist. It's their game plan. They just keep repeating it over and over again in hopes that it sinks in and people accept it. And we're going to continue to push back. Again, you know, Mark Meadows brought up a worker who was a part of the Trump organization who said, no, I don't work for racists. And then he got accused of being a racist for bringing that up. So, yeah, we're going to push back and we're going to show the flaws in their reasoning. And we're going to talk about our president. And what he should do is just continue doing what he's doing. You know, working with North Korea. There's going to be another summit. I mean, the way that worked out was just perfectly. And
Do you think there's going to be another summit? Do you think there should be another summit?
Absolutely. I mean, you know,
wouldn't
Richard
you have
Haas
to have more stuff nailed down before the president goes to the trouble?
No, I don't think so. And let me explain. I think a lot of old school politics are about, let's get the issue solved and then let's get the two leaders together. You know, Kim Jong-un is a young guy, and what I think Donald Trump wants to do is move his ideology, and that's going to take a relationship. Earlier in your show, you had someone talking about Gorbachev and Reagan, and they developed a relationship that led to change. And I think that's what Donald Trump's doing. He's working on a relationship with this young man and young leader.
You don't think that, you know, the president really did go much more than halfway. I think any objective observer can say that. He traveled halfway around the world last summer to go to Singapore to meet this guy, did it all over again when the guy took a 2-hour train ride to get to the Vietnam summit. Yeah. And he goes 10 or 11 hours, you know. I'm just wondering, what do you get for that?
Well, I think you get a deepening relationship that hopefully, and you know, there's no guarantees here, but hopefully moves the young man's ideology a little bit. Because if we're going to get, you know, a cooperative agreement with them, if we're going to get capitalism in North Korea, it's going to take an ideologic change on the part of Kim Jong-un. And just working out the details like it's a, you know, a new NAFTA agreement and then let's talk, that's ridiculous. That's not going to work here. It's about winning a heart relationship with Kim Jong-un, and I think that's what the president's doing. He's playing chess. You've heard the expression before. He's playing chess and others are playing checkers, and I think that's exactly what's going on. He's working on a heart relationship with Kim Jong-un.
All right, we'll see. Congressman, thank you for coming in on Saturday.
Thanks,
Good seeing you. All right, well, the Dow's finally snapped that winning streak. It had gone on for 9 weeks, but in case you think you missed your cash karma moment, the guy who literally wrote the book on it says, no, yeah. All right, well, after 9 weeks, it stops. 9 straight winning weeks for the Dow, and it ended. But it's a streak that still has the Dow off to the best performance we've seen in the better part of 3+ decades. NASDAQ racing ahead as well. But these weekly changes, even if they come to a halt right now, what do? Do you feel that you've missed the opportunity? Market guru Dan Geltrude says, you know, you step back and you look at the fundamentals here. He talks a lot about that in Positive Financial Karma. It's a very interesting read on things. And what makes it interesting is it's not highfalutin business advice or big words and acronyms and terms that just make you think you're watching CNBC. It just speaks English, and it gets to the core of a guy who's a practicing Buddhist. So he's a little weird, but I'm telling you, he's brilliant. Dan Geltrude is his name. Positive Financial Karma is the book. Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
Yeah, the Buddhism thing, I joke about it, not to joke about it, but that's part of the thinking here. Explain.
Yeah, the basic premise of Buddhism, when you talk about karma and action and reaction and that boomerang effect of the things you do, very important. But it comes down to this: it's cause and effect. Right? What's the cause and effect of all the things that happen? And if you step back and say, well, we see the effect, what caused that? And keep it simple, Neil. If we do that, we can really uncover a lot of things and be successful in a very simple way.
Well, a lot of it is very to the point advice. I mean, when it comes to losing weight, you gotta, you know, eat less, exercise more, move more, to your point.
More.
Now, when it comes to investing, what do you do? Because the simple take on this is, maybe stock's gotten a little rich, you hold off. What do you say?
Well, what I say is, and I talk about this in the book, keep the emotion out of it. You know, the fundamentals, Neil. What are the things that, the causes that give you the effect that you want? What's your investment strategy? Stay the course. Don't get swayed by the headlines, by all the noise. I think people in this world that we live in with immediate gratification, news constantly, 24/7, you have to step back and tune that out and say, I'm going to stick with the fundamentals.
All right, well, how do the
what
fundamentals apply now? If you had 9 straight weeks of Dow advances, we're off to a very strong start to the year. 9 times out of 10, that means the rest of the year is going to be strong. So there are a lot of people who just say, all right, I'm going to follow that. Well, but they get in love with being in a market that's getting all this buzz and attention. What do you tell them?
Well, right now, if you're invested in NASDAQ and you see what's been happening over the last 10 weeks, you say, hey, fundamentally what I'm doing is working. But now step back and say, how long is that going to continue to work? Will that strategy stay the course? Again, noise out. Focus in on what the plan is, because clearly it's working. If you go back to December and you were paying attention to the noise, you would have panicked, pulled out and missed this run that we've had for the last couple of months.
But if you get into this run-up, you could be equally blamed for getting caught up in the froth and getting screwed all over.
Absolutely. So
what do you tell people? Depends on your time frame, right?
Right. So if you're already in, stay in, ride it, believe in the fundamentals and how you invest your money, Neil.
And that's where you get the good karma. All right, Dan Geltrude, Positive Financial Karma. He's the author of a very uncanny read on things without trying to talk way over your head. So he could never be a financial TV anchor. He could, actually. Let's take a look at the Amazon situation in New York City. Not too far from me, they were going to build a spanking new headquarters in Long Island City. That's not happening. Now, New York's governor has come out to say, Jeff, is there a way you can reconsider, please? Pretty please? After this.
Any kind of fool could say that there was something in anything about
to get Amazon to rethink splitting from Long Island City and not going ahead and nixing a building in New York. Tracy Grasco is joining us with more on that push to get them back.
Good morning, Neil. New Yorkers are known for not giving up, even being a little pushy if necessary. No exception when it comes to Amazon's HQ2 project. Yesterday, dozens of New York union leaders, local officials, business executives published an open letter in the main section of the New York Times asking Amazon to give New York City one more chance in bringing its second headquarters to the Big Apple. The letter does its best to persuade Amazon that most New Yorkers really do want the company, its 25,000 jobs, and billions in dollars in new tax revenues. It also says Governor Andrew Cuomo will take personal responsibility for the project's state approval. And Cuomo has reportedly had several conversations with Amazon executives, including CEO Jeff Bezos, since the deal fell apart. So far, Amazon has shown no signs that it's willing to reconsider. Neil?
Thank you, Tracy. Let's get the read right now from Joe Borelli's a Republican New York City councilman. They're trying. They're pulling out all the stops. So you think it'll succeed?
He's trying, and he's right to try. I mean, we shouldn't give up on the prospect of 25,000, not just jobs, but we're talking real careers for real New Yorkers. The problem the governor faces is that New York, in and of itself, is the reason why Amazon's not coming. Amazon itself isn't the problem. They're just the result of the problem. We can't be a high-tax, high-regulatory state and expect companies that don't necessarily need to be here to come here at their own will. And this type of crony capitalism...
A lot of the critics of this didn't understand how business deals are made. Like Amazon was getting a $3 billion gift or something. I mean, it was going to offer $28 billion to the city and New York State, and there were credits, tax credits for that, no different than those allowed to everyday individuals.
You had a Congress member who doesn't even represent the property where this is, basically poison the well and convince New Yorkers that this was a choice somehow between $3 billion for Jeff Bezos to line his corporate pocket, which isn't true, versus $3 billion to address some of the real problems New Yorkers face. I mean, this is something that's appalling for a freshman Congress member to make. We can accept a little bit of naivety, but when it is poisoning the well and really jeopardizing the future of an entire New York neighborhood, it goes beyond that. And frankly,
something must be poisoning the well, because it's not just New York. Right now, there are similar protests going on in Virginia, where the company wanted to build and still plans to build a facility as well. But it's taken hostage the party at the same time and cost a lot of jobs.
You know, we tend to give AOC too much credit, but here we certainly shouldn't. If you look at the short history of this deal, you had local officials actually writing to Amazon and saying, please come here, we want your job. A few months later, those same people were saying that Amazon is an immoral company. The only thing between point A and point B was point C, Cortez. She came out against it, and she made those politicians scared. She's making lists in Washington amongst her freshman House colleagues. She's making lists here in New York amongst people who previously thought themselves to be progressive.
Well, you know, I don't know the story of the timeline for these councilmen and women. There were three who were not keen on this, and then Amazon said, oh, the hell with it. But I do notice that common in their argument early on, because I talked to one of the councilmen who was opposed, was that these were not going to be union jobs. So when I asked him at the time, So you would say no to thousands of jobs simply because they wouldn't be union jobs. And he effectively said, yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, the premise is false. You saw a whole bunch of unions today, yesterday rather, in Governor Cuomo's open letter. You had the building trades union supporting it. They were going to build construction with union jobs. The tech industry is not known for unionizing its tech employees. This is not an industry where the employees even want to be a part of the union.
And it's going to chase away other businesses who might want to look at setting up shop in New York. I think not so now.
This type of gumboat diplomacy, where we can basically hang sticks and carrots in front of businesses at the threat of some obscure political board just eliminating their deal, this is not an environment where businesses will want to come. And if this continues the way it is, if Governor Cuomo continues running the state the way he does, we can expect more businesses to pull out.
Well, God bless him. He did try.
He did try
to get them here, and he's trying again. But again, to your point, it's going to be an uphill battle. Joe Borelli, thank you very, very much. We should say that New York also has lost better than $2 billion in revenue prior to this even getting started, with a lot of folks, of business and otherwise, seeking out lower tax locales like Florida after this. All right, we're focused on dueling rallies. To the left of your screen, of course, the CPAC event still going on here. They're preparing to hear from the President of the United States in a little bit more than half an hour from now. On the right of your screen, Bernie Sanders in Brooklyn, New York. He's holding a rally to let folks know a little bit more about him and his personal life story. In the meantime, Ellis and Barbara at the White House on what we can expect out of the president at CPAC a little bit more, as I said, a half hour from now. Ellison.
Hey, Neil. Yeah, we expect to hear from President Trump in about half an hour. Typically, when he speaks at rallies, speaks to crowds of supporters, the president rarely sticks to a script. He tends to talk about things that he sees as successes in his administration. He often talks about unemployment, the economy, plans for building a wall at the southern border, and then criticizes Democrats for not supporting his agenda. Today, we don't know exactly what Mr. Trump will focus on, but there's a chance we saw hints of it when his vice president addressed the Conservative Political Action Conference yesterday. Vice President Pence focused on Democrats trying to link them to far-left ideas, telling those at the conference that Senator Bernie Sanders, a self-described Democratic socialist, is a leading presidential contender in 2020, and that the rest of the Democratic Party is following in his footsteps.
Democrats are embracing the same tired economic theories that have impoverished nations and stifled the liberties of millions over the past century. That system is socialism. What they're actually offering is just more of the same. More taxes, more spending, more government, and less freedom. And as the president said 24 days ago, so we must say with one voice, America will never be a socialist country.
So we'll see if President Trump follows that similar path of trying to politically damage Democrats by trying to lump them all together under an umbrella of socialism, or if he decides to go the route of talking about more specific ideas and policy goals of this administration. Neil?
All right, Ellison, thank you very, very much. Let's get the read on all of this. And the Democrats are jumping into the race, including Bernie Sanders, who's going to eagerly tell his life story. The governor of Washington State entering the race. Joe Biden maybe later on next week. Beto O'Rourke maybe on next week. Most of them are of the view here that the government can and should do more, which means the spending can and should be more. CPA Dan Geltrude, of course, the karma guy, S&P Global Portfolio Manager Aaron Gibbs, and Fox News contributor Jonas Max Ferris. Jonas, who's resonating right now? Because to a man or woman, the distinction is they want the government to do more than certainly Donald Trump. So who's impacting whom?
Okay, this new element that's rising in the Democratic Party is getting all the attention, but the actual party, when they do polls, the Democratic Party actually wants to be more centrist. However, on Twitter, with the media, with the attention, it looks like everybody's behind AOC, and she's a big star, and she's driving a lot of attention.
But do your market pals worry about that message or no?
I don't think so, because there's no path for that to go anywhere, because the majority of people aren't for it. You're not going to, I mean, socialism isn't going to take off with this low unemployment rate, the market high. There's too much good that people don't want to mess up. No one wants to rock a boat that severely. That said, it can drive you through. In fact, it might help because it'll get you through a primary, but then you're going to lose a general election because it's not moderate enough. The party's already having problems, although they're getting a lot of attention. They're starting priority tests and essentially putting people on lists, and it's getting very confrontational internally, and it's very difficult to be a moderate and climb now. But it's the moderates who would actually win and get policies that would increase taxes and spending, but at a level that is normal. Let's put it that way. The policies that are being thrown around now are not going to go anywhere because they're not going to ever win. They're never going to get the public behind them. They never get voted on. There's too many people that don't want to do those things.
But there's a general assumption that none of those candidates has a chance against the president built into that market premise. I can remember people saying the same about Donald Trump. I can remember people saying the same even about Ronald Reagan. I can remember Jimmy Carter folks hoping he would be the nominee because they could smash him like a bug. We know what happened.
Yes. And interestingly, that Jimmy Carter's election was the one election that had 17 Democratic primaries. And so that's the only time that we've seen this many candidates during the primaries.
In 76, not the one in 80.
Yeah.
Where his principal challenger was Ted Kennedy.
Exactly. So that came after Watergate. So that was why there were just, so many candidates coming up. So I think, well, once we finally start seeing the Democratic primaries, some of the debates come through, maybe calmer heads might prevail. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's the extreme values that are getting the media attention, the extreme proposals. And so until we really see all of them on the stage, we see all of the views, maybe then we can start to see more of the mainstream candidates that might really potentially win.
Incumbent in that argument, Dan, if you think about it, is a world that's different from the one we're living in. I mean, you would almost think this is the Depression. Instead, record low unemployment, record levels of jobs for almost all key demographic groups. The market's doing very well, corporate earnings doing very, very well. So I know there is this detachment sometimes that can exist in the mainstream media, and some people don't like the president, fine. But you can't really argue with the economic environment right now.
Yeah, you can't, and I think Jonas's point was right in terms of the economy is just too strong right now for socialism to grab hold. And I think if you look at this as all politics is local, look at what's going on with some of these states and how government is expanding and taxing, like New York, New Jersey, states like that. And what are you seeing? Migration of wealth. And it's not only just wealth, it's other people are migrating out of these states. And I think if the Fed gets in that place of where they're going to grow government, and it's going to be tax and spend, and we're going to start leaning towards socialism, although I don't think we're going there now. But at some point, if fortunes reverse, we can go that way. I think you're going to see an impact on the market, and you're going to see a migration of wealth accordingly.
Now, of course, Bernie Sanders' pitch, and he's going to have this event in New York City, is that you have not gotten a chunk of that. You have not been able to benefit from that. And that is his clarion call. The difference this time is that he has many more candidates echoing that theme, including many who weren't even born when he was first echoing it. What do you think?
Yeah, and I don't want to. Bernie Sanders started this whole thing. It's just that AOC is a more vibrant. I know you just mentioned a little while ago the parallels to Trump. The world could change in a year. We could be in a recession not our own fault, and all of a sudden these ideas could take hold. AOC is a very powerful, dynamic personality, and she could actually shift what is the average in the Democratic Party left. She's that kind of a Trumpian quality, even though we disagree with the policies and they're bad for the economy. That doesn't mean they're not going to. They couldn't take hold in a certain environment that could happen next year. But there's a lot of people running, and Bernie really did start this. And she, I believe, used to work for Bernie Sanders in his election. I just don't see right in the current.
That's right.
year.
I forgot that.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you're like, oh, we dismissed it a few years ago, but these ideas build and build, and then you get an audience behind it. All of a sudden, you're like, a few years later, you're like, what happened? We're having a 70% tax rate, and it's possible. But it also, I think, plays into Trump because Trump, in some ways, is more centrist. Like, he can beat a very far left candidate because his policies they're not really that extreme. A lot of them are populist. They were things that were Democrats wanted to do with tariffs, and there were actually things so I think he is going to see more.
Yeah, he's concerned for American workers and the jobs aren't shipped overseas. That is more keeping with the union movement and Democrats than it's typically a Republican crowd. Aaron, do you think that the markets are hearing this, though, and not liking the direction, whatever the politics, that if it, we've got this record debt, it's to the point now where I think one party has called it a national security threat, Republicans, even though they've done little to address it. But that the worse this looks, the worse the prospects look for anyone advocating still more government?
There's certainly a concern, not right now when things are healthy, but that possibility that if we hit a recession and that risk increases, that's when that gets to be a real concern. So if we're advocating more and more spending, that's when the deficit really becomes a bigger concern. And so, yeah, there's definitely a fear in markets that we want to get a hold of the, get the deficit a little more under control in case things go wrong.
Right.
And yeah, so there's a fear out there.
All right, guys, thank you very, very much. By the way, we did hear, get a tweet from the president, a sign that he's watching. He makes a note of the issue that Kim Jong-un took better than 2-day trip, a 3-day trip, according to the president, not the 2 hours that I believe I had mentioned. He is right about that. I did mean to say that it was a more onerous trip for the president to take because he had to fly halfway around the world, but the president is right to say that this guy taking a long train trip, just as bad. He had to do that, that is Kim Jong-un, because he didn't want to look like he had to borrow a plane from the Chinese to get there. Be that as it may, the president's watching, and I think he likes this. A little more to this.